Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Implementing Basel III Seminar. My name is Miguel Pratt, Program Coordinator at the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services. And on behalf of the Central Bank of the Bahamas and the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services, we want to thank you for your support and participation in what we believe to be a very important seminar on Basel III. Well, with all that said and done, we have a lot to cover. I'm going to go ahead and invite Mr. Glenn Nordich at the podium to establish protocol. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I am Glenn Nordich. I will be your moderator for the day. And in the Bahamas, we have quite a number of persons who excel in the financial services industry, and we are delighted that we have one such young, energetic, enthusiastic person, and she will be coming to give our opening remarks. But I can't help, because we are doing a bit of recording for posterity's sake, I will do a bit of the bio, although her full bio is, actually not her full bio, because there are some things that are missing in your program. But I just want to do some things under the heading of CAP, C-A-P. So from a career perspective, Ms. McCartney is an attorney and chartered banker who currently serves as CEO and Executive Director at the Bahamas Financial Services Board. She previously worked as Assistant General Counsel in the hospitality sector, served as Managing Director of RBC FinCo, and also as Regional Manager for Compliance at RBC Bahamas and Caribbean. Academic achievements, that's A. She holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Reading, UK, a Master of Laws degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science, an MBA in Leadership from the College of the Bahamas, as well as a Chartered Banker MBA from the University of Bangor in Wales, United Kingdom. P, on a personal level. We had career, academic, now personal. She's a former senator, and she is also, you may know her very well from the TV series Roundtable, which is very popular, and she's also very actively involved in her church in vestry and other activities as a mentor. Ladies and gentlemen, a great Bahamian woman, Tanya McCartney.
Gosh, I hope I live up to the expectation that he may have set. Good morning. Let me begin by thanking the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services for inviting me to bring opening remarks at this important session. Certainly, training and development of professionals is key to the sustainability and growth of the financial services sector. As we promote the Bahamas and encourage persons to do business here, key planks in the Bahamas advantage is our highly skilled workforce and strong regulatory framework that adheres to international best practices and standards. In response to the key lessons learned from the 2007-2008 global financial crisis, the Basel Committee released in December 2010, which they revised in June 2011, Basel III, a global framework for more resilient banks and banking systems. According to the Basel Committee, Basel III is a comprehensive set of reform measures developed to strengthen the regulation, supervision, and risk management of the banking sector. These measures aim to improve the banking sector's ability to absorb shocks arising from financial and economic stress, whatever the source, improve risk management and governance, as well as strengthen banks' transparency and disclosures. In the Bahamas, due to the very nature of our economy, we are particularly susceptible to external shocks. As a consequence of Basel III, which came into effect in 2013, banks are expected to maintain a prescribed minimum of common equity to risk-weighted assets. Beginning January 1st of this year, a capital conservation buffer was introduced. These reforms are designed to raise both the quality and quantity of the regulatory capital base and enhance risk coverage of the capital framework. In your respective roles, I am certain that you manage capital adequacy to ensure that at reporting you are in good standing. And I see that the central bank is collaborating in this effort here today. Basel III also introduced a minimum leverage ratio, which is intended to constrain excess leverage in the banking system. It requires two liquidity ratios, the liquidity coverage ratio and the net stable funding ratio. Both of these concepts are ones which in my prior life, I see Chris here today, Chris Hanna from Royal Bank, we had to pay close attention to while serving in my previous role as managing director of a local bank. It impacts confidence in the sector and in the jurisdiction at large. Commendably, we have had a quite stable banking sector. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it is not by chance that the Bahamas is the most successful international financial center in the Caribbean today. More than 80 years of thought, effort, and cooperation have produced ideal conditions for high and indeed ultra-high net individuals, families, and businesses to manage their wealth efficiently, in comfort and in style. Moreover, it is not by chance that we have a stable domestic banking sector. The country's mature financial services industry, established infrastructure, and regulatory framework all have been cultivated very carefully to satisfy the specific need to preserve and grow financial services. We have a highly skilled and educated workforce and a long tenure in financial services excellence, creating a deep pool of skill and experience that is recognized and trusted worldwide. Further, we encourage the growth of our financial sector through adherence to internationally accepted principles such as Basel III. Strengthening the Bahamian financial services industry involves investing in our people through sessions such as this. Today, you will review new developments in Basel III, delve into investments and liquidity risks, and as well as look at how enterprise risk management has evolved. All of this is critical to maintaining the Bahamas advantage. I commend you for seeing the value of continued professional development, and I encourage the Institute, Kim Bodie, and all of the staff at the Institute to continue to be the premier institution for education and training in the financial services sector. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCarthy, for such a well-delivered set of opening remarks. I'm sure that has set the framework and got our minds to begin to wrap around what we have to deal with as we encounter today. We have a number of other persons who will be speaking, who will actually be doing presentations during the day, up until we will be here until about 3 or just a little before. And our first session speaker is Mr. Keith Checkley. But before I bring him on, I just want to let you know that session 1 talks about the new developments in Basel III. Mr. Checkley will be bringing an international perspective, okay? And you can see he already has it keyed up. He's going to give his executive overview, which will be followed by a domestic perspective from our supervisor, the Central Bank of the Bahamas. And then we will have lunch, and then there will be a speaker during the lunchtime, which will be that person will be speaking another element of Basel III, investment and liquidity risks, and then she will be followed by Mr. Komalafe, who will be talking about enterprise risk management, and actually it is now being referred to in recent terms by Basel as firm-wide risk management. Okay, so if he links between firm-wide risk management and enterprise risk management, it's because firm-wide risk management is the new thing. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me call to the podium Mr. Keith Chetley. Sometimes I wonder if he is a Bahamian or not, because he has been coming here for so long, for about 22 or more years. I did not get a chance to check his passport to see if it's a Bahamian passport, but he is one of our bulwarks here at the Bahamas Institute of Financial Services. He's a chartered banker. He's an international consultant, and we are very privileged to have had him involved with us as an institute. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you Mr. Keith Chetley.
Okay, thanks, Glenn, and good morning, everybody. Fantastic turnout, almost as good as for Donald Trump on the campaign trail. So I said to Miguel earlier, look, if there's any difficult questions, don't post them to me, send them to Donald Trump, because he's got all the answers for everything, hasn't he? Yeah, without any problem whatsoever. The only thing I'm missing is the red tie, because Miguel has got that for today, so you'll have to put up with blue. Yeah, I've been coming here for 22 years, and those of you who I've worked with before know I have a terrible habit of telling what Miguel describes as corny jokes, so I promised this morning, with such a serious topic, I wouldn't tell any jokes. But I could not resist just telling one little story, yeah? Which does involve risk. Now, Tanya, you would see, studied at Reading University to gain her law degree. That was the beginning of her academic career. And at the Reading University campus, there's a business school called ICMA Centre, which is the International Capital Markets Authority. And recently we had a visiting group of Chinese coming there from the Securities Association of China. And these people were quite senior. And those of you who have met Chinese people who are senior probably know that they don't speak any English whatsoever. Yeah? The younger people do speak some English. I'm quite fluent in Chinese. I know one word, which is gambe. Gambe is cheers, so it's a drink. But the danger is if you're in Chinese company and they say gambe, whatever glass you're holding, you must drink the whole thing down in one go. So be prepared. That's another risk story I won't go into, but that was a celebration evening. So they came to the centre. We had 2 weeks of capital markets and related risk management. And what happened was the president of the Securities Association, the vice president, and one of the senior executives were very, very keen golfers, and they wanted to play golf at one of the top courses in Berkshire, near to Reading, and there's a course there called Bear Lakes course, which is quite a famous course. And the organiser, because I play a bit of golf, but very amateurish, they asked me if I would host the event. So I thought, well, that's straightforward, there's no risk in that, is there? Really, playing golf with 3 Chinese people. Little did I know what was about to happen. So off we go to the course. So I brought my own golf clubs, and then we got to the golf course. First thing was trying to organise some hire clubs for the 3 Chinese gentlemen. That went reasonably smoothly, so I talked to the professionals of us. Then we got into electric buggies, and my clubs were on the back of one of the buggies. Now the guy who I sat next to in the buggy, he was the man who was like a really star Chinese golfer, so he's very, very good. Those of you who know anything whatsoever about golf will know the big club that you hit off the tee is the driver, okay? And the driver has different angles. Most amateur players like me have 12 degrees or 15 to help get the ball in the air. Yeah? Professional golfers like Tiger Woods used to be, sorry, we're not recording this, Tiger Woods is, would use an angle of 7 or 8 degrees. So the first thing that happened was the guy sitting next to me, he looks into my bag, not knowing it's my bag, because he thinks it's a hire bag, takes my driver out, and he goes running back into the professional shop to try and change my driver for another driver, which would be a higher driver with a lower degree. Come on, this is the funny part so far. So anyway, I'm wrestling with this club, trying to explain to him, that it's my club, it's not a higher club, but of course I speak no Chinese, he spoke no English. So this went on for a few moments. We finally established rapport again, and got into the cart, and off we went. I thought it was a Formula 1 race, just like the way you drive here in Nassau. Well, if you could, but you can't because there's too much traffic now. Speaking of China, you go to Beijing, you'll see real traffic. 5 million cars on the streets of Beijing. So anyway, the story goes, we're going around the golf course, and I learned very quickly some Chinese etiquette, because the guy I was playing with, we were playing against the president and the vice president, and after 3 or 4 holes we were way ahead, and then suddenly the scoring stopped. There was no scores after that. Why? Because the top man was losing, and top man in Chinese culture is the top man, so you have to respect, yeah? So anyway, the game continued. Where does the risk come in? We got back in, headed for the restaurant. So bearing in mind the golf was unexpected, they're going into this very sophisticated restaurant, carrying their various bits of equipment like golf shoes and things in these plastic carrier bags, yeah? So the guy running this restaurant came rushing to the door, stopped us coming in straight away, and explained there's a balcony out there, you could sit out on the balcony. So I thought, well, that's okay, we'll sit on the balcony, that'll be fine. The weather was quite good, not like -5 2 weeks ago in England. So what happens next is the waiter comes up to the table, drinks. So that was easy, because I just said, beer, and everybody knows beer right throughout the world. So that was the first part, that was easy. But then the risk started. Anyone guess what it was? Well, the menu, yeah. So here's the menu all in English. I speak no Chinese. They can't read any English. What am I going to do now? I don't know whose phone this is, but anyway, I'll pick it up. I said, I'll phone a friend. Yeah? So I phoned this guy that I know who just speaks in Chinese. He said, don't worry, Keith, it's really easy to solve. Just look at the menu, see what you think would be the most popular 1 to 4, mark them down 1 to 4, and then pass the phone over to me and I'll speak to them in Chinese and tell you which it is. Brilliant, my risk situation solved. So he said, good news, Keith, it's your lucky day, everybody wants steak and chips. So great, I thought, well, I'll have the same and make it really easy. So I said to the waiter, 4 steak and chips, please. Thinking that's the end of the story. What does he say next, Tanya? Well, you should have. What would you say about steak? Yeah, how would you like it cooked? Rare, medium rare. So at that point, that's the end of the story. Yeah. So there we go. Okay, now down to the serious subject. So a bit of history is very important. We had a long history with the Caribbean over many years, and I can see why those sailors, almost hundreds of years ago, always wanted to come down here, because of I could see the beautiful ocean, the sunshine, and the beautiful Bahamian ladies, yeah? That's why we used to sail here in about 3 weeks, stay here about 6 months, and take 3 months to sail back to the UK, for various reasons. So Basel I, look, Basel I, you need to make note of this if you don't know it already. Basel I was 1980s, and it was very straightforward. Basel I was about looking at credit risk only. So the committee came with some 17 key principles for credit risk management, which I do know because I've cross-checked with the central bank here, and they are still applicable in our industry today. So those of you who've got quite large credit portfolios within your total assets and the balance sheet, credit risk management will be very important. So under Basel I, we have principles for credit risk management. Now you'll see in your study packs there is mention of one case study, which is the famous Barings Bank case study, which is the first major collapse in the UK, where a young man aged 27 years old, he broke the bank. Yeah? The bank was Barings Bank, they'd been in existence over 300 years, then this young man started a division in Singapore, which is a long way from the UK, even further in Nassau, and he managed to break the bank. So we'll take a quick look at that and see what lessons we can learn. But because of that case and certain other high-profile events, the Basel Committee decided to introduce what they called the Market Risk Amendment. So that was our next milestone. That was 1996. Market Risk Amendment, which is still applicable today, well, almost today, because that's been applicable for 20 years, but just last month the committee are talking of introducing a new way of measuring market risk, so that's really stop press. If you want to check on these things, I encourage everybody to go on to www.bis.org, standing for Bank of International Settlements, and you'll see on the homepage is Basel Publications. I've told Kim this many times before, once you go on there you never ever need to buy another book because there's thousands of publications on there. Picking your way through the most important ones is very difficult. So that was Basel I, credit risk, then the Market Risk Amendment. So in July 2004, Basel II came out. Now we do need to focus a bit this morning on Basel II. Why? Because Basel II broadened the scope for risk management into credit risk, market risk, and the really, really difficult area of operational risk. Credit risk we're quite good at because we've been doing it a long time. We've got lots of systems in place to help us. Market risk is a bit more difficult to manage, but operational risk has proven the most difficult to manage internationally. Why? Because the events are so varied. You know, you can have very small operational risk events, and then you can have catastrophic risk events. So they're quite diverse. The committee call these low frequency, high impact events. So Basel II is in place and has been in place since July 2004. So if you're on the website and you want to get more information, you could look at that. Why Basel II is still important to us is because when we turn to Basel III, which is the theme of our seminar today, we'll find that Basel III does not replace Basel II and Basel I. If it did, it'd be quite straightforward because all we need to do is download all the new Basel III documents, but it isn't like that. Basel III, you have to remember, probably good to make a note of, Basel III is enhancements to Basel II, or improvements to Basel II. Why did they need to improve it? Well, Basel II came out in July 2004, and we know what happened, and Tanya reminded us this morning. You know, we had the global crisis 2007, 2008, so we do need to know about both. So Tanya mentioned this, and I'll just begin by reinforcing it. You can see there on the first bullet point, building on the three pillars of Basel II. So in Basel II there were three pillars which we'll refresh our memory on, and Basel III builds on this. And there's extra things coming in, such as liquidity ratios and leverage ratios that we will take a look at. Sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Technical risk, operational risk. Operational risk. So Basel II and III are complex topics, but we shouldn't be afraid of them because here in Nassau you've got a very strong international base, and you've got a very strong personal desire for knowledge, and you're also prepared to do things early and seize these opportunities. For example, Basel II came out July 2004. I spoke to Kim about it. We did the first Basel seminar in all of the Caribbean. We did this in 2005. So that was Basel II, that was very quick off the mark. And we were ahead of Trinidad and Tobago, who did it with us late 2005. So these things are complicated, there are big challenges, and there will be some unique things that apply here in Nassau, which we'll hear from the central bank when they talk about implementing it from a more domestic basis. But Basel II and III will provide frameworks for firm-wide risk management, which Glenn mentioned. So the new words being used are firm-wide risk management, as opposed to what we've done here again several times. Over the last decade, we've run enterprise-wide risk management programs, just the same thing. This clicker's going the wrong way. Yeah. So here's a recap on Basel II. Basel II had three pillars. Why they call it pillars, I do not know, but they did. It could be divisions or departments or parts, it doesn't really matter, but that's their terminology. We need to get familiar with it. Pillar one was the mathematics. It's about the minimum capital requirement, and we'll see in a few moments this would consist of the credit risk capital, the market risk, and operational risk capital. Pillar 2 is the part that will probably affect most people in the room. This is a supervisory review, and this helps us because it gives us insight into our expectation of what our own supervisors should be looking at, what internal audit should be looking at, what external audit could be looking at, and then very importantly, what the central bank inspectors will definitely be looking at. So Pillar 2 is very important. For those of you who are senior level, Pillar 3 is very important because that's what the Americans would call transparency. Pillar 3 is about disclosure and market discipline. So if I'm looking in the annual report and accounts of a large financial institution, what I'm expecting is from the board of directors disclosure how they're managing the risks. Yeah, they should be telling us. They should be telling us from an investor relations perspective and from a shareholder perspective. The next one is, Miguel and I, we can never sleep at night. We don't sleep together at night, by the way, but I wake up 2:30 in the morning and he wakes up at kind of similar time. And I always encourage him to do diagrams when he wakes up. So don't lie there thinking about whatever, try and do something creative. So this diagram is meant to capture Basel II in one diagram, which is quite tricky to do because those of you who've looked at it on the website, it's 257 pages. So it's a massive document, but I would encourage you to look at it on the website because you can download it. It's a PDF, it's free to download, it's got credit risk, market risk, operational risk, it's got some good templates in there that you can use, and also you can download it in sections as well. So this is trying to summarize those 257 pages. So you can see we've got the Pillar 1 capital strategy, Pillar 2 the supervisory review, and you see compliance coming through very strong there. Compliance once again is the global hot topic. Particularly for HSBC at the moment, because of some recent events. Even the world's biggest bank, they're not exempt from some risk management things that will happen. And Pillar 3 is the disclosure. Pillar 1, just for a moment, can you see the complexity of Pillar 1? And this is difficult for the central bank because the Basel Committee gave choices. And when you give choices and calculation, it makes life more difficult, doesn't it? Things on the computer, all the different ways of doing things make it more difficult. If there's only one way of doing it, it would be more straightforward. So for example, under credit, if we have a strong credit book, a lending book, then we have three choices under Basel II. We can go for the standardized approach, where most of the inputs are from the regulator. Most people tend to head for the IRB intermediate position, which is where you develop an internal rating-based approach to all of the credits in the bank. Some people call this risk rating, some people call it credit scoring. So you try to classify the portfolio by way of risk, that's the intermediate position. And then the more large, I nearly said sophisticated, but not necessarily so, large I think is a better description, international banks, they'll be heading for the IRB advanced approach, where they will do everything with their own mathematical models, but it's subject to the agreement by the central bank supervisors. They've got to sign it off. So it then brings the risk under their control. Market at risk, you can see, that's a methodology called value at risk, which has been used for a long time. That's where you do all those bell-shaped graphs and all the complicated mathematics to try and come up with one risk figure for all the market risk activities you're doing, and then you would judge that against the balance sheet strength. That's going to change from 2019, different methodologies coming in. And then the difficult one, operational risk, is the basic approach. Then the standardized, which is much better because you stream your business into 8 different lines of activity, and your capital charge will be against the activities that you're undertaking, because the basic approach is just one mathematical calculation based on everything that you do. So the second method is better. The third method, the advanced, is the one we'd all like to try to get to, but I can assure you there's only about 12 banks globally, managed to get onto advanced measurement approach for operational risk. Why? Because what we said earlier, it's very, very difficult to do. Second pillar, trying to create a risk culture. We're doing this, carefully. We don't want to kill the business. We don't want to become over-obsessed by the risk management, over-obsessed by compliance, because at the end of the day, we've all got businesses to run. We need to make sales. We need to make profits. We need to generate cash flows. We can't just think risk every day that we're at work. So we have to do this sensibly. Are there procedural manuals? Are there company handbooks? Visiting inspectors from the central bank will want to see your credit risk manual, your market risk manual, and your operational risk manual. If you don't have them, you're going to need to get them set up. And then heading to this right-hand side, and we'll pick up on this a bit later, risk event handling. Again, this is very, very difficult. You could say, well, of course we know this, Keith. We've got files, haven't we? You do have files on risk events, but where are they? Have they ever been coordinated? So the Basel Committee recommend we set up some type of risk log or risk register or risk event database. The purpose of that is so we can try and see, the type of risks that you face in your organisation, which will be different to yours and to yours, And then we can focus on the type of risks that we see and see if there are ways of mitigating these risks. So the risk event database, very important. And pillar 3, we've already mentioned, the disclosure aspect. There's some dates coming up there, don't worry too much. July 2004 was the launch date for Basel II, as Tanya mentioned. There's obviously been a slippage with this, but the Caribbean generally, are ahead. You're doing really, really well. China, I've worked in Beijing 7 times. Only the very large Chinese banks are now getting onto Basel II, so we're ahead of them here. So that's good, isn't it? You should be pleased with what's happening in Nassau. We do quite a bit of work with the Bank of China, who are one of the 32 systemically important financial institutions globally, and they're just moving into Basel II. Bank of China is a huge bank. I told Miguel before, I met one of their branch managers, asked him about the size of his branch. And the obvious question is, how many staff have you got? You won't believe what he told me? 10,000. Not 1,000. In this branch he has 10,000 staff. So that's the size of these Chinese banks. You check in the Hilton Hotel in Beijing, the check-in counters like that, and there's all these people there waiting to check you in. Yeah? A bit different to checking in. I can say. Yeah. By the way, this is Miguel's speech, look. I always try to outdo him because this is mine on here. That's good, isn't it? I am slightly worried because on the back of his speech, can you see what he's got? A photograph of me. Oh, no. Sorry, Miguel. No escape. Even on the podium. Okay. So the first pillar, just recapping on that. So the mathematics are there. These 3 choices. Market risk, same as before, using VAR methodology. Operational risk, 3 choices. And then towards Basel III, you'll see in your handouts, I haven't asked you to actually do anything yet, so I'm going to get you into action. So if you look a little bit further after my slides, you will see a document that starts with that, Basel III press release. And again, Tanya did such a good job, she mentioned this already. That this was the launch from September 2010. But quite often with these Basel publications, and the people in the room I've worked with before, most of these Basel publications, there are some very useful things right towards the end, right towards the appendices. And this is no exception. So if somebody says to you, can you tell us about Basel III? Well, a good way is obviously looking at the slides that we're using today, but another good way is looking at this handout, and with a bit of luck, you'll see there's a chart right at the back of the press release. Can you try and find that? That's page 7. Annex 2, they call them annexes, we call them appendices, yeah? So Annex 2 gives you, on one piece of paper, the planned phase-in arrangements for Basel III. So it's a really good document, I hope you'll agree. Let me just fast forward to that document. It's on the screen. Now there are there's four really important areas on this diagram. The first thing to start with is the time scale. You know, look at the time scale, 2011 running through to 2019. So it's a very long time scale. Some critics of Basel II have suggested, well, you know, when we had this global crisis, why wasn't this time scale much tighter? You know, I would tend to agree. Maybe it should have been shorter, but you know, this is the Basel Committee's plan. There's the time scale there. A little bit later you'll hear of the time scale that's envisaged for Bahamas. But this is the Basel Committee international time scale. Now there's a lot of things on here, but the important thing to start with is if you could underline or highlight this here, look, this line here, which is the capital position, plus the conservation buffers that Tammy was mentioning, because what you'll find is the strengthening of the balance sheet. So you're taking the balance sheet, you're taking the capital. Basel III wants to strengthen the balance sheet by simply strengthening the capital position, which means more capital, yes? Now the recommended international capital adequacy ratio for years and years and years was 8%. That's the international capital ratio. What the committee are recommending, you can see, is moving from 8% to 10.5% as of January 2019. So it's quite a long time scale. You're probably going to say to me, well, Keith, why are you telling us this? Because we've already got more than 10.5 and 10 years nodding ahead. She should know, you know, as Managing Director of the Financial Services Board. I won't ask her what the figure is, but the figures will be different for different institutions. And why do you carry more? Well, you carry more, you know, because of the guidelines from your own central bank, you know, which should be relating the capital to your own economy, economic background, and how you're wanting to be perceived. The larger the capital is, the worse it is for running the business. Why? Because this capital is locked away, and in business the way we make money is by working our capital, yeah? So we do try to hold a minimum figure, but it's got to be a figure that's sufficient in anticipation of possible shocks that's to come. So that's the first important thing. Capital with these buffers, these extra layers, going to 10.5%. Next thing that's important is when we talk about Basel II, and I said credit risk, market risk, operational risk, which I know you've all memorized already. What about the other risks? What other risks do institutions face? I'll ask you because we were working together last evening. Operational, reputational risk, yeah? What about strategic risk? You know, a new MD comes in, man or woman, and they want to really push that business forward. Okay, that can be good news, but it can also be strategic risk, particularly if they go out and buy another bank, you know, without proper due diligence, which happens, of course, in the UK. Classic example is the Royal Bank of Scotland. They had acquired a much larger bank, the National Westminster Bank, and because that acquisition, it was a hostile acquisition, was successful, and the chief executive, Fred Goodwin, became knighted by the Queen, Arise Sir Fred, for doing good services to financial services. And what did he do? I have to be careful because this is being recorded. But what did he do? He rushed out and bought a Dutch bank without undertaking proper due diligence. Why? Because he thought, well, I've done it before, I'm successful, you know, I'm Sir Fred, I know what I'm doing. And of course, the rest is history. It led to the largest bailout in the history of the UK, where the government had to put in £30 billion, about 46 billion US dollars, to bail this bank out. When I say the government, I mean me. Because, you know, I pay tax, we have to pay tax in the UK, well, except if you're, you know, maybe Google or Starbucks, or things, you know, where they use various complex accountancy. Have to be careful because I've got lots of accountants here. Methodologies to transfer profits and expenses into certain other jurisdictions. Can't say too much about that because George Osborne's got a fight on his hands trying to get Google to pay over 100 million of tax. He's got a fight on his hands with the Royal Bank of Scotland. I can't believe this. We bailed them outright. They made huge losses. Now they're starting to make profits. What are they doing with the profits? They should pay tax, yes? They're not. Why? Because they're clawing back the tax losses that they made when we bailed them out, not to pay the tax now. Boy, it gets worse, doesn't it? This is a rocket ship, just like this podium here. So, cash flow is a risk to everybody in this room. It's always a terrible risk to Miguel and I, because, we like to go out and get a few beers. Neither of us have ever got any money, so we have to try and get cash flow from somewhere. Banks are the same. Lender of the last resort, of course, is the central bank, aided by the government. So what the Basel Committee have decided, because of these extra shocks, these liquidity shocks, they would suggest building in 2 liquidity ratios. They're right at the bottom of the screen on your chart. So, Tanya mentioned them again. Liquidity coverage ratio and net stable funding ratio. These are 2 basic cash flow ratios. Liquidity is a very posh word for cash flow. Yeah? And of course it should be here. When our business clients come in, if they're small, medium or large, as bankers, if we're involved in lending, we say to them about how important the cash flow is. Have you done a cash flow forecast? Are you monitoring your cash flows? And here we are in the bank, being proven we can't manage the bank's cash flows. That's very critical of me, because the worst job, I think, in a financial institution, I used to think it was credit control, but it's not, it's the treasurer. Can you imagine? I can't sleep at night now. If I was treasurer of an institution, there would be no way I could sleep. All these thousands of cash flow entries coming in, and worse still, all the more thousands of entries going out. So, on a serious note, the Basel Committee are bringing in these 2 cash flow coverage ratios, similar to what we have in business anyway. The other important thing is during the crisis we saw certain financial institutions, including Lehman Brothers in the US, I'll only give one American name because I'm not really biased against Americans. And then in the UK we've had lots of similar things, and I'll show you an example where the balance sheet gets overheated. And Glenn and I have been around quite a while. We would call it overtrading. Yeah? It's just the old-fashioned word. We talk again to customers, be careful, don't overtrade in your business, don't grow your business faster than your resources can sustain. Generally it's the balance sheet or the cash flow resources, and that's what's happened in banking. Certain financial institutions have leveraged up their balance sheet to maximise their profits. Well, you could say, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but of course there's not. But you have to be careful. If you over-leverage, what's happening to your liquidity positions? So the Basel Committee again have brought this in as an extra. Everybody okay so far? So there it is at the top, look. So 3 new things coming in. Strengthening the capital position, which we've looked at here. Bringing in 2 cash flow ratios, and bringing in a balance sheet constraint by way of leverage. The complication is leverage in general business terms is debt to equity, or liabilities to net worth. Leverage in a financial institution is all of the assets in the balance sheet. So that's the difference. All of the assets in the balance sheet relative to the capital base. So that's the restriction that's coming in. We'll take a look at that in a moment. So all of these that you've got are counter-cyclical ratios, etc., etc. Lots of things there that I've been talking about. There's the calculation on a previous slide. I'm jumping around a bit now. So Tier 1 capital, what does that mean? Well, basically, your central bank will give you the definition, but basically it's what we would call proper capital. Yeah? Proper capital basically is the share capital with retained reserves. It's none of these complex hybrid instruments that we sometimes see in financial institutions' balance sheets. So again, the Basel Committee are trying to tighten up the quality of the capital as well as the quantity of the capital. So a 2-pronged approach. Again, it's being more business-like, isn't it? It's trying to make the financial institutions more like the way for years and years and years we've advised our business customers. And the global liquidity standard, I won't say too much on this because you've got a whole session on it this afternoon, but those 2 ratios coming in, which I've got on the screen there. They'll be explained in more depth this afternoon. The important thing on ratio number 1, liquidity coverage ratio, is to look at the time horizon. It's a 30-day profiling of cash flow, so obviously very short-term cash flow ratio. And the second one, which will be explained in more depth this afternoon as well, is the longer-term one. Look, the net stable funding ratio with a time horizon of 1 year. So 2 cash flow ratios coming in. So revisiting Basel III diagrammatically, so if you can find this one in the slide packs going forward a bit. So Pillar 1 under Basel II, remember, was the capital mathematics. Under Basel III, it will be the enhanced minimum capital position plus that leverage ratio in terms of balance sheet and liquidity ratios coming in. Pillar 2 will be enhancement of the supervisory review section in terms of risk management, and as Glenn mentioned, taking the firm-wide risk management approach as opposed to enterprise-wide risk management. It's the same thing. You're trying to predict and manage what I would like to call a galaxy of risks. And of course the problem always is that unknown risk, isn't it? You know, we're making all a list of the risks, and then it's the unknown risk that can get you. And more deep capital planning, again as stipulated by the central bank. Pillar 3, enhanced risk disclosure and market discipline. Now this chart you've got no chance of reading, so Miguel's promised to do an enlargement which you pass out to you late in the day. But this is another international organisation that here in Nassau we're partnering with. So BIF's partner with the Chartered Banker Institute in the UK in terms of Chartered Banker and Chartered Banker MBA. But one we're developing the relationship with is the CISI. This is the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment in the UK, headquarters in London, not to be confused with the Canadian CIS, although the names are very similar. The UK organisation has 40,000 members globally in 80 different countries, and they have a whole series of programmes and qualifications, and Miguel has already selected one that he thought was appropriate to the Bahamian context, and they launched that one, Fundamentals of Finance. That's been quite successful, and we're currently looking at another 2 programmes which are on the list that Miguel has passed out to you by way of a survey. You have a survey form to have a look at. This is from them. This is their one-page summary of Basel III, which you can't read, but when you get the enlargement, you'll be able to read it. So they talk about Basel III, the capital position there to the left, and then they talk about risk coverage, look at containing leverage, talk about Pillar 2, risk management, Pillar 3, market discipline, and then liquidity on the right-hand side. So again, it's a summary of Basel III, very useful one-page summary for a discussion with your colleagues. So you've got 2 documents which should help you summarise it. Then at the bottom here, which you can't see either, this is SIFI's, S-I-F-I. It's currently a buzzword you need to remember. SIFI is Systemically Important Financial Institution. You can do a Google search on this and you'll see there are currently 32 globally. Have a look at it, because you'll be quite surprised by some of the names of the large banks that you would expect to be on there, and they're not, and some of the names that's on there that you probably wouldn't expect. So it's worth taking a look at. These are the systemically important financial institutions. And guess what, of course, we're standing in Hilton Hotel, now owned by Chinese. There are 2 Chinese banks in the top 32 global systemically important. One I've already mentioned, Bank of China, and the other one is the China Construction Bank. So they're both in there. Further reading, if you want to read more, then I've given you there very briefly. There's the website reference. you'll see BCBS, the Banking Committee on Banking Supervision. So there's hundreds of these, but that's the reference number for you. It's bcbs189.pdf. So if you click on that link with a bit of luck, it'll get you straight into that document, and you'll see all you need to read about Basel III. So there's the reference for you there. Okay, now my next slide is seminar discussion. So can we get people discussing something at this early stage? What can we discuss? We could take a quick look at the Barings Bank case study, which is world famous, so it's in your pack. I should remember everything about this because we were doing it not last evening but Monday evening with our certified international risk manager program, and the idea is to look at the summary and see what sort of key risk management lessons we could pull out from this case. So I'll just stop talking for 5 minutes while you have a quick look. Just read through these 2 pages, highlight things that catch your eye, and then we'll talk about it. So think as risk management, think about the things we've been discussing. What sort of risks can you see in this case study? And then we'll talk about it, and then what I'll do is we'll try and put the risks that you have identified into a risk register. So that'll bring us right up to date with what your central bank are recommending, developing a risk catalogue or a risk register or a risk event database. So the good news is I'll be quiet for about 5 minutes.